Hello and thank you for downloading Witness from the BBC World Service with me, Rebecca Kesby. And today we go back to Afghanistan in December 2001. Local anti-Taliban forces, supported by intensive US airstrikes and special forces on the ground, have retaken the cities of Kabul and Kandahar. But Osama bin Laden is still on the run, and it's Gary Berntsen's job to find him.
When we had entered Afghanistan, I had been given instructions to accomplish a series of things. Number one was destroy the Taliban because they wouldn't surrender bin Laden. Destroy al-Qaeda as an organization. And then, of course, finally, eliminate bin Laden.
Gary Berntsen was the CIA commander in eastern Afghanistan. He'd been working closely with his contacts in the Northern Alliance and the US military since the American action began in October. But just as the army was beginning to believe the war was practically won, Gary felt that one of the most important battles was yet to come.
It was clear to me that the military's instructions were slightly different than mine. I could see that they were very rapidly getting themselves involved in, okay, what do we do after we defeat the force? We have to hold the ground. We have to stabilize the country. We have to do all of these things. And they were not as focused on the mission of finding and eliminating bin Laden. Bin Laden had fled Kabul. He'd moved along the road in a massive group. There were about 750 to 1,000 people with him. They had moved south to the White Mountains.
The White Mountains on the border with Pakistan are a formidable natural fortress, very high, very cold and fairly inaccessible. They also contain the Tora Bora caves, used by Osama bin Laden as a tactical bolt hole. Gary had been hunting him since the 1998 bombings of the US embassies in East Africa, and he believed it was crucial to find bin Laden as soon as possible.
I had gone to the US military. I had requested a team to accompany me. They didn't want to do that yet because they didn't believe that we had vetted allies sufficiently. The military, likes to plan in advance. They want to know, okay, we're going to fight in 3 weeks or 4 weeks, and we're going to have a brigade, 3,500 guys, and we're going to be supported by artillery, it's going to be supported by air. There was no advanced plan for them to put forces into Tora Bora to jump. They had to move very, very quickly. I had made my best case for that. When I realized that I wasn't going to get support for that, I decided to go alone. I was able to assemble a team of individuals, coordinate with the Afghans, and I was able to push a team into the east of Afghanistan. But it was a very, very risky plan. I was very, very worried about their safety because still al-Qaeda and the Taliban were operating in platoon and company-size elements, and that would put the very small team that I was pushing in there at great risk of either capture or death.
And initially, that team was very small.
I had, 4 CIA officers, 3 current JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command individuals, and 1 SF medic. And those 8 men would be led by 2 16-year-old Afghans. And then out of the 8 men, 4 volunteered to go up into the mountains with a group of Afghans from the Pashai tribe, get up over the top of this very large element of al-Qaeda with bin Laden, and then contact me. They contacted me, said, we have these guys on the ground, request permission to commence attacks. I then, of course, said, yep, let's begin. I gave them the word. They then made contact with a AWACS aircraft, and then they lined up all the aircraft in the region, brought them all in, and began a 56-hour battle. We were, of course, using air power, and that included B-52s, some of them flying from the United States. They flew over the North Pole. A lot of the planes were coming out of Kuwait. We had aircraft coming off of aircraft carriers in the Arabian Sea. There was a lot of air activity in that sector once the battle began. So this is 4 Americans alone in the mountains with 10 Afghans against 750 to 1,000 people on the ground. And I did not inform CIA headquarters that I was doing this. I did everything possible to initiate a battle without asking for their permission because I was very concerned that they wouldn't authorize any of it. They would want to know how many people I had. There would have been a slew of questions. I didn't want any questions. I didn't want to hear anything from anybody. And quite frankly, I didn't trust the 7th floor of the CIA to do the right thing because they had not done the right thing for a number of years before that. And I didn't care if I was fired or relieved either. I was just going to do it.
What could be the final battle against Osama bin Laden is underway in the White Mountains of Afghanistan. Anti-Taliban soldiers helped by American special forces are advancing on the cave complex of Tora Bora.
In fact, Gary wasn't fired. He was congratulated by his bosses back at base. Then US military support did begin to arrive, but very little of it in the form of American troops.
Then 14 guys from special forces would go, and then only later would 40 guys from Delta Force appear. So, at no point were there more than 60 Americans there. There were more journalists at that battle than Americans.
From Tora Bora, Clive Myrie reports.
We watched as anti-Taliban forces continued to pound the foothills of Tora Bora.
The US had relied heavily on local forces in Afghanistan. Gary, who was fluent in Dari, had been building strong links with the Northern Alliance for several years. But Tora Bora was out of their territory, and so he'd had to build a new army, from scratch and at speed.
The Northern Alliance refused to go. They were Tajiks mostly, or Hazaras. They didn't want to go into the east to fight against Pashtuns. They said, no, we're not going with you. So I, of course, linked up with a Pashai warlord who had been in contact with them, formed a force with him, and then 2 other Pashtuns from the east would join us with their men. So I wound up paying them several $1 million to put this force together. Some of them may have been farmers before, or some of them had been fighters or army. It was a mix from 1,800 to 2,000 people. And then Delta Force would help lead those men into a battle up on the mountain.
American jets have dropped a 15,000-pound Daisy Cutter bomb, the most powerful in the American arsenal, on a cave complex in eastern Afghanistan.
We would drop a Blue 82, which is a 15,000-pound device. So we actually threw one of those at him. We threw a lot of other B-52s at him. But as this was going on, of course, we're trying to move these Afghan forces forward, and then sometimes the Afghans would pull back. When you send people off and you are conducting unconventional warfare, there aren't straight battlefronts. It's a confused situation on the ground. You are working with people that are unreliable. Some of them will turn against you, which did happen down in Tora Bora. So it was quite complicated, and there were times there where I felt that there were some serious disconnects. The largest disconnect, of course, was that with Department of Defense, because I understood that my mission was to kill bin Laden. I'm not sure that everybody in DOD understood that.
But Gary, in spite of the ferocious bombing of Tora Bora, Osama bin Laden was able to escape and live for another 10 years before he was found. And many people see that as a great strategic failure of the United States to miss him when they had the chance.
It was, of course, a flawed masterpiece. Part of it was a failure on the part of policymakers to recognize that they needed to shift tactics. But at that last piece, at the end, we needed a larger number of American forces. But the Department of Defense didn't recognize the importance, and all I could do was manage the forces I had to destroy as many members of al-Qaeda as possible. Bin Laden limped out of there. His force was destroyed. It took years to rebuild it. Many of his closest, most capable people died on the ground in our response to 9/11, and many of them died in Tora Bora.
Gary Berntsen was awarded the Intelligence Star for acts of extraordinary heroism in 2004. Since leaving the CIA, he's written several books, and he was speaking to me, Rebecca Kesby, for this edition of Witness.